Okay, I'm here with Aleh Stair, and obviously, you are the man behind the wasted possession draft. Just tell me how your involvement came about as like back in the early days, and how it's progressed to you being now the main man for wasted possession.
Um, it's weird. Like the earliest inception of Ace Possession was when I first started streaming, and there's a dude who never actually ended up taking part, who said he'd always wanted to do something, a podcast, something like that. So me and a few others, including Stick Piano, kind of grouped together, and we're like, well, what do we want to do? And that was kind of up in the air. And at the same time, Mckinsey wanted to host a regular Friday evening draft. So we said we can take care of that for you. And then ended up hosting these Mckinsey X-Wasted Possession drafts every single Friday. It all just literally started from that. And then yeah, as it progressed, we got better and better. And then again, as things progressed, I ended up taking the role with people leaving or people not being able to put as much time towards it as they were. So that's when it became me as that sort of director involved in it.
So talk to me about how the McKinn's angle comes in. So how did McKinn's know to get in contact with you guys in order to how did you find out that he wanted to do a draft?
I think he just mentioned it a couple of times in his streams. And Stick Piano was in there. And because we were looking at doing something, didn't really know what it was. And at that time, there were no sort of draft competitions like the Streamer Showdown about, the playoffs, the Super League weren't around yet. And I think us three were the first in that sort of space to do it in the way that we do it. So it was literally Stick approached him, saying, either help or whatever time you may or may not be able to give to it, we can sort that side out. And then eventually Mckinsey was like, I'm not really doing much to put this sort of thing together, so you guys might as just take over.
Of course, and obviously, just to wrap up that sort of segment,
Yeah.
obviously, now that you are the man in charge, what is the most challenging thing you've found from setting up these draft competitions? Because normally but me and you, we sort of face the brunt of the crowd on the day, and everything seems okay on the day, but the hard work and effort that goes into it. What's been the key challenge for you in order to get right for the waste of possession?
Just the organization of it. I mean, there's so many things that you have to do. You have to make sure you've got enough people who are doing X, Y, and Z in order to do it. And obviously, big shout out to the likes of Stick Piano, Javirolo, and an FM Girl. I wouldn't be able to do it in the capacity that it's done without them. And then you've got to obviously sort out who's taking part, and that's particularly a challenge with wasted possession when we have as many people in as we do for as long as we do. And then even then, like you look hunky dory on the night sort of thing. You got the camera on, but from that sort of role that host role, you're not only just looking at the games, you're looking at the WhatsApp. Not the WhatsApp, the Discord group, seeing everything's okay, making sure that the people on comms are okay, and keeping an eye on that, keeping an eye on the social media, keeping an eye on on so many different things at the same time. And that can be quite difficult to initially do, having your head in multiple sort of places and needing more than two eyes really in order to get that done. But yeah, that's probably the hardest thing, and it's the bit that no one really sees, which I think people learn when they start to do their own competitions. That is a difficult part of trying to get it done.
Indeed, it is. But I got to talk about the kickback. Now, was this
Okay.
100% your idea? Was this something that you pitched, or was this something that you were working on as a team? How did the idea for the kickback come about?
I I don't want to sound like arrogant, but if there's one thing that I do well, it's just talking. Like it's been my whole thing. Like any job that I've been successful in, it's because of I was able to talk. And to be honest, it's got me through some interviews when I didn't think I was particularly too qualified to get the job. And so that was a skill that I had, and it was a good way, in my opinion, of getting more eyes on wasted possession and reaching out to a lot of people across everywhere and kind of having increasing our sort of emergence, because the thing that we didn't have, which the playoffs had, was somebody who was already established in the community and known, and that worked against us in that way. Like I'd consider us, all three of us, to be on a very similar level now, but in that early day that wasn't the case, and I wanted to bridge that because I knew no one in the space. Me, Stick, everyone involved were at the very, very early stages of doing anything within the space, so we didn't have the contacts, and it was my thing. I had pretty much free reign on that. People would make suggestions, but it wasn't like we're going to decide who we have featuring as a guest X, Y, and Z. It was all my sort of input with that, with the time that it was on.
So obviously you had like most of the big names across the FM community on there, and obviously go check out the videos on the Waste of Possession channel. But I want to ask, because obviously interviewing and hosting is two different skills. So one, I want to ask, in terms of you as an interviewer, what did you learn about yourself over that period? Because doing interviews, it's a tough skill, right? So when you're interviewing someone else and you're asking questions, like, how did you find that?
I think like it was weird in the start, because I know I said I'm good at talking, but when you're doing the interview, you need to know when to shut up as well. And that was something that I wasn't particularly good at. So that was like the first thing that I really, had to sort of learn in that regard. And the big difference between being a host and being the interviewer as well. When you're the host, it's about, I have to carry it in some form of way to make sure everything transitions well. Whereas when you're doing that interview, like right now, the 90% of the talking's me. Not the other way around. When I'm the host, 90, like I wouldn't say 90, I'd say a solid 65-70% will be like me talking, asking the questions, etc., etc. So it's like you use the same tools but use them in different ways, and it was just learning how to use the same things in multiple different ways.
Then who was obviously like interviewing people, even people that even via the camera, and how they're hosting can be different as an interviewee, right? So two type question here in terms of who was the most fun to interview and who surprised you. Maybe you had to dig a little bit more out just to get a couple more sentences out of
them. See, this is the thing. I never considered it an interview. And I think that was the important thing. I considered it a discussion. And that's how I branded it. But in terms of like most surprising was RDF, because that was an early point in that where I was thinking, I think he's a little bit closed compared to, how it had gone previously, because I'd done a few at that point. But there was a point where we talked about some of the issues that I had in the past. And then after that point, we couldn't stop it. I think it turned out to be our longest episode, and we were still talking for 3 hours about just everything afterwards. And like at the beginning of that, I wouldn't have thought that would be the case. In terms of most enjoyable, like from start to finish, it's tough because everyone brought something to the table in a different way, and I thoroughly enjoyed all of them. There wasn't one where I thought that was a bit crap. But I think the one that I hit it off with the best, and it just carried the whole time, was probably Curti, man. Like we discussed everything. We went through like some of the like some pretty dark stuff at one point in that interview regarding like people around us, which I think we could heavily relate to, which I wasn't expecting. And then just off the bat, I think maybe it was because he'd been used to sort of the podcasts and talking to maybe people he wasn't familiar with at times, and knows what you kind of have to do to make it work. But that was one where from start to finish, it was great. I lost track of time.
Did it surprise you that those types, because obviously these interviews you would have been digging about their football manager, story and so forth, and telling their story. Were you surprised that the interview took that turn? Or like, because that's really interesting that I don't think the idea was for you to talk about these topics, but they ended up being covered. Like, did that surprise you?
Well, if we're taking that RDF and Curti one, RDF, yeah, because it was about some of the issues that he'd seen and voiced on Twitter. And it was obviously towards a sort of racial issues. And as someone who's a personal colour myself, I wanted to have that dialogue with him because it's something I feel awkward with. It's like you can like when you want the representation, but you also don't want to get it and think you're only getting it because of the color of your skin and then feel like an imposter. And that was something that I wanted to go over with him, which we did. With Curti, I didn't expect it to take that turn. But it was sort of like, why did you go into it? Why did you go into content? Event happens, you think life's too short. I nearly swore then. I should. I don't want to. I nearly did. It was a case of life's too short, and that was something. The exact same thing happened to me. As I won't say what Katie said. You can watch it if you want and that. But with me, someone who I wasn't particularly good friends with when I was at college, I said particularly like we were friends. Whenever we'd see each other, we'd say hi. I worded that quite wrong. Whenever we'd see each other, we'd say hi. We were friends from high school who ended up going to the same college, and it was just nice to see them. And we did get on. We had a lot of mutuals, and he unfortunately passed in an accident when he was 17. And that's what led to me coming out my shell. And it was a case of like, without that event, I don't know if I'd have started because I wasn't out on my shell then. And it was just something really similar that we'd both gone through, sort of thing, despite the differences between us, which really I think like in terms of like the way I see Curti is in such a better light because of that similarity, because I understand where it's coming from.
No, it's true. Like I've done tons of interviews, and from people from all different sports, and it's crazy that you can make small connections. Like, I've had small connections with racing drivers that I've interviewed that you never thought that would ever happen, just from things that you say to each other, and all you're like, oh, and then it moves on like that. It's just it's pretty crazy. But moving on to Football Manager a bit, obviously FM playoffs winner here that I'm talking to too. And that is a tough competition to win. I know, because I've been in it 3 times.
I made it look terrible.
Easy. Just talk me about that. What was the game plan going into it? Like, how did you think it unraveled for you?
Honestly, my game plan initially was just to have a good time. Like, I'd have loved to win it, but it was like, will I? I don't know. There's some, like, I think Katie's in. I'm pretty sure. I think RDF might have been in. And I was like, we'll see what happens. And I lost my first game against Limo. And at that point, I was like, here we go. Here we bloody go. It's all going on hell. And then I think we just kept going and going. And obviously that was that whole Andy Carroll thing where Breezy took Andy Carroll when everyone knew I wanted him. And then me and him ended up making it to the final. I just kind of think like it was a perfect story where he'd taken Andy Carroll and I was like just like pretending to be a lot angrier than I was about it in the chat. And then for us to go on to the final and be playing against each other, I think it might have been a little bit of that sort of, it was just perfect for the narrative. And I don't know, maybe I'm not giving myself a bit of credit for the win there, but yeah, like it was just going in to have a good time, man. And I ended up just going all the way.
Nice. So obviously you've started drafting a lot recently, like now, because I've obviously been doing the waste of possession, like you've been doing. Obviously, you're in the Spring Cup and so forth. What have you learned about FM22 in the drafts that you've seen, in the drafts that you've taken part in, that will sort of help you in terms of the Super League coming up?
Honestly, in that regard, everything. I even at the time of recording, I don't know who else is involved, but I'm going to say with pure conviction that I've probably seen the most drafts out of everybody who's taken part. Especially if we're looking at from a competitive draft standpoint. And when you have that vision, you have seen players get picked time and time again. You get to see what works and what doesn't work that a lot of people might not have found out yet. So just that pure knowledge of everything that's happening there, I think puts me at such a significant advantage. And with waste possession, the pool in the draft can be a little bit wacky sometimes. So whatever is thrown at me, I feel like I know enough about it to thrive.
Perfect, Ali. We're out of time. I really enjoyed that.
I feel like we
Thank
could
you
have gone on
so.
for another 2 hours.
Yes, could have turned it into a kickback, but honestly, really good luck. Really good luck for the Super League coming up, and best of wishes.
Cheers, man. Appreciate it. And thanks for putting it on.